All right, so today I want to talk about something that we all know a little something about, and that is forgiveness. However, I am not merely talking about the normal forgiveness where somebody says, I'm sorry I did this thing, and you say, that's okay, I forgive you. I'm talking about the type of forgiveness that can become very, very difficult for all of us, and that is forgiving someone when they won't admit what they've done. My suggestion is forgive them anyway, and here's why. Now, I talked about this a little bit in one of the more recent videos I did on dismissive avoidance about how many people simply lack the emotional capacity to admit something that they may have done, regardless of how obvious and, regardless of you saying, I have your hat right here, they may still just deny that it's their hat, even though it has their name on it and you have a picture of them wearing the hat. Some people just aren't going to be able to do that. Now, one of the reasons they may be unwilling to admit what they have done is they are going to have a fear that you won't forgive them based on previous experiences that they've had. So, at some point, you're going to have to stop beating your head up against the wall, trying every possible way that you know how to get them to admit that they did something. You can try telling them how much it hurts. You can try drawing analogies to things that have happened to them. You can try all manner of things, but what most likely is going to happen is that the more that you try to get them to admit something, the more that they are not going to be willing to engage, to the point that they will just completely not even acknowledge the conversation that you might be having. You might start to feel like the words that you're writing or the words that you're saying are not even literally being heard, because some people can become that much of a brick wall. My suggestion for your own mental health is to forgive them anyway. Because once you realize you're caught up in that loop, okay, of trying to get them to apologize or even just to try to get them to acknowledge, that energy now has been taken from them and shifted into you, okay? They've had a giant ball of fear, anxiety, whatever emotion it is, whatever reason it is. Sometimes it's a trauma from a long time ago, but all of the reasons that they are not willing to acknowledge that they've done something are in a giant ball of fire. And they've now handed it to you. And why would they want it back? Why would they want it back? You have accepted that they've done this thing. You now have the giant ball of fire. And for them, admitting it would be like taking that giant ball of fire back. So if you forgive them, well, now you haven't taken the ball of fire and put it back into their hands, but you have removed it from yours. Okay? You have taken the ball of fire and you've placed it on the table. At that point, it's their choice whether they're going to take it back, okay, or not. But of course, if you've forgiven them, they can't accept your forgiveness without admitting what they're being forgiven for. Now, many times what I would suggest is forgiving them in private, not saying anything about it. You can change your behavior towards them. You can act as if you had forgiven them, treat them in the same manner that you would have treated them had they said, I'm sorry, and you said, I forgive you. Because for your own mental health and your own sanity, that's going to be the only way that you can handle that type of situation. Not everybody is going to be willing to admit their faults. And like I talked about in that video about dismissive avoidance, many times people won't realize or even acknowledge their part in what went wrong in a relationship until the next relationship or even the next relationship, because the person that they did the wrong to is no longer there to judge them. There's no fear that they won't get forgiveness because they're not asking for forgiveness from the person that they've wronged. They're simply acknowledging that maybe they did this thing a long time ago. They're acknowledging it with you, but you have no judgment over what they did. So it's safe for them. The thing that can become maddening for the person that needs to forgive is, especially if it is something that was hurtful that the other person won't acknowledge. Because you might get stuck in the trap of trying to convey the hurt as a way to get them to have empathy, sympathy. At some point, they're going to feel guilty enough, right? That they'll at least say, all right, I shouldn't have done this thing. You might get the rare person that will finally admit it. But most people, once they've dug their heels in and won't acknowledge the thing that they've done, it's going to take something extraordinary to get them to finally say, all right, I guess I did this thing. Because then they're going to be in a position of, well, why wouldn't you acknowledge it all of this time? It was obvious. It was right there. Why wouldn't you acknowledge it? So they're not going to even be willing most of the time to accept your forgiveness. But if you only do it on an energetic level, they don't have a choice. They don't have a choice. If you stop being hurt by what they did and you simply take the steps to move on and forgive them. Now, this doesn't mean if it was something that ended the relationship or something that was, that you would feel was a deal breaker, it doesn't mean you undo the deal breaker or you have to take them back. That's not what it means. It means you're letting go of that energy of waiting for their acknowledgement for your own mental health. And the only way that you can remove the waiting for the acknowledgement is to act as if they did and then to forgive them anyway energetically. Now, rare case where you might want to shoot them a text, say, hey, look, I forgive you, right? But then you have to think about the person that you're dealing with. You may trigger them further by saying, well, I forgive you, or I forgive you anyway. Those are the words that you're going to want to use for yourself, whether it's in your meditation or whatever practice that you're doing. But I would tread lightly in terms of actually verbally telling them or writing them some sort of message that says, I have forgiven you, because if they're not willing to admit what they did, then you may trigger a whole new set of circumstances that causes a whole nother trauma, because now that you have forgiven them, you have removed most likely you've removed the reason why they didn't want to acknowledge what they did in the first place. And that puts them in a very weakened position. And that's the last thing, is that some might feel that forgiving someone with a lack of acknowledgement is sort of weak, right? Some of us might say, I'm going to put my foot down, and no matter what, I will forgive you if you acknowledge. I will forgive you if you simply say, yes, I did this thing. At some point, the power dynamic there switches, and it becomes a power dynamic with them and their inability to have the emotional capacity to admit fault, that having the power over your mental state of mind. You don't want it to get to that point when you sense that you are just abundantly frustrated by the situation, when you are replaying the conversations over and over and over in your head, trying to find something that you think might get them to acknowledge what they did. When you catch yourself doing that, it is beyond the point where they should have already just admitted things. And at that point, you just have to forgive them anyway.